Joe Biden has been unfazed by at least the criticism, and the criticism has been narrow, right? I mean, most Democratic voters do not read, the New Republic or Current Affairs or any really publication. Most voters don't read, period, and most of them don't listen to this program, and so it's hard to know whether people are still supporting Biden despite their knowledge about things like, Jane Mayer wrote in the New Yorker today, reiterating that fact that the reason why Anita Hill was hung out to dry during those hearings is because Joe Biden prevented 3 women who would corroborate, if not the specific stories, at least stories about Clarence Thomas. That's in the New Yorker. That's a little bit more mainstream. There are issues with Joe Biden when it comes to race, when it comes to trade, and his, the depth of his union commitment seems to be rhetorical at best. Yet, with all that, his numbers are going up, and the data, at least in certain circles, shows, and certainly the anecdata shows that the reason why Joe Biden is getting this support is articulated, and probably very appropriately so. I mean, I have no problem with her, but I mean, I think it's indicative, by Alyssa Milano on MSNBC with Ali Velshi and Stephanie Ruhle. Here it is.
Or some progressives who say this is not enough. Is that a mistake? Are they not focused on the overall mission for all Democrats, which is to defeat Donald Trump? Earlier today, Michael Steele said Democrats have a choice. You want to be woke or you want to win. Do you agree with him?
I think it's a great point. I think, look, there's nobody in the world that wants progressive policy to be set in place more than I do. But this primary to me is not about policy. It's about beating Trump. Period. That's it. End of story. We need to nominate someone that is going to beat Trump. And bring honesty and integrity and dignity and truth back to the United States of America. Empathy, compassion, all these things that I want to teach my children growing up in this great country. We need someone that's going to represent that to the best of their ability and fight Trump. And it's not about who's going to make the best president. It's really about who's going to beat this man, this horrible, horrible president.
Now, I mean, this is a part of the problem with making it all about Trump on some level, as opposed to the fact that he is the perfect representation of Republicans. But I will say this. There has not been, in my lifetime, a candidate who has been picked because that candidate can win, who has won. Do you understand what I'm saying? Is that when voters start getting meta and trying to anticipate who is the strongest candidate to people who are not like me, it's always ends up being a failure.
Well, there
frankly.
was also that good. I mean, I know some people had some problems with the methodology, and there's always a balance between accommodating where people are and then trying to push where you want to go. But I think, there was that really important piece in the Times about the just total disconnect between like online sort of Twitter woke stuff and where most normal voters are at. And that's real. You can't get by that. And that's why I've said, Joe Biden is tough for us to cover because his appeal is not covered by any of our quadrants. I even think some of the other candidates that we don't like and we don't support are more recognizable in our worlds, right? I think Joe Biden really isn't on both cultural and obviously policy levels. But I also agree with you. I mean, I don't know if you're leading up to this. I don't think any argument for any. I mean, look, I think you can make narrow arguments. Like, I do think Bernie would be quite effective in the industrial Midwest. I think, unfortunately, Biden might be too. So I'm not going to be resting any of my arguments on this electability.
I think it's totally.
If we
I
need
think
to
it's
cross
totally
the threshold
appropriate.
is another thing,
well,
though.
saying that
If somebody's coming at me saying Bernie is unelectable, then I will marshal the evidence he is.
Yeah,
is different.
exactly.
Right. But saying that someone appeals to certain types of folks, I think is actually something that you can prove in the moment. Right. You can look at that and it's just founded on a lot more than sort of speculating who is going to beat Trump in the context of a one-on-one election. I mean, I think it's quite clear why people like Joe Biden now versus why they didn't like him in 2008 and in whatever it was, 88 when he ran. It is because he has the imprimatur of being the vice president of a president who is considered very popular, of a president who is very much in contrast to Donald Trump. There's also a sense that people have that Hillary Clinton's loss proved, and I don't know if I subscribe to this, but certainly Hillary Clinton's loss, or even had she won, I think it would, by a narrow margin, would have exposed the intensity of sexism in this country and its the comfortableness in which people have in their sexism versus their racism in many respects, I think. And
yeah, the fact that there are people whose first choice is Joe Biden and second choice is Beto, or I'm sorry, people have the first choice of Bernie and the second choice of like Beto or anybody but Warren, that proves that sexism is real.
Yeah, and I also think, I think that's part of it. I think it also, shows that like the sensibility in which people are. If you look at a candidate's appeal on various different planes, that the plane in which you may find Bernie appealing on the policy level is not necessarily the same plane that somebody else would. Somebody else could just see them as being outside of the mainstream. And someone could see that as Beto as being outside the mainstream too.
Yeah, politics are dumb as shit in this country. People do not always vote based on policy.
That's chapter 7
well, I mean,
of my
at
book.
people are voting on brand identity, policy, also, and I think that is where, again, like
here's the other thing is that in June of 2016, my big fear was that if you get 4 years of Trump and you're able to get rid of 4 years of Trump, you're going to get exactly what we got after 12 years of Reagan and 8 years of Bush. And 12 years by Reagan, I mean the third term of his was with H.W. Bush, and 8 years of Bush, which is a safe Democratic pick. Now, Obama was some weak tea in terms of ideology, in terms of policy. He was some weak tea, particularly coming after Bush. And Joe Biden, frankly, I think his politics are worse than Hillary Clinton's. And so we are in, maybe there's an argument on foreign policy. It's a little bit better, but I think
it's essentially it's a wash, and I think he's got a few. I mean, he can point to a few.
Joe
more
Biden
things just because of the length of his time
led the fight to cut Social Security.
True.
In the Obama White House, I don't think Hillary Clinton would do that. I think she's just too no.
Oh, okay.
No.
Then we see it.
Well, the
differently.
Clintons did want to privatize Social Security, right?
No, Bill Clinton did, and there were certainly members of his cabinet who did. But I'm also comparing Hillary Clinton to Joe Biden contemporarily,
Yeah.
Joe Biden, back during the Clinton administration, was, trying to project basically a racist profile. So, I mean, I would compare them apples to apples where they were on their trajectories. I think his politics are just really bad. And so I think I think he's super problematic.
Well,
it's going to be interesting to see if over the course of a campaign, though, he doesn't do as well. I mean, we're going to see. But what's going to happen is if these polling numbers stay up, you're going to see Harris, you're going to see Beto, you're going to see Booker, you're going to see all these people basically run either for vice president or for a cabinet position or for a higher profile in the Senate. And it's going to very quickly be a question of Biden versus Bernie and Warren. I think that's very possible.
And I hope that if the dynamic holds as it is now, deep into the election, then Warren will back Bernie. Because I think that is going to be the choice.
She should back Bernie, and he should make her his running mate.
You're also presuming, though, that Warren doesn't pick up more from those people who fade.
I'm definitely presuming that. I respect and like Warren, but I don't see it. I think Bernie, if you want...
She's moving up in the polls.
If you want a progressive candidate, it's Bernie's...
But do you think the people who are supporting Beto and Kamala and Booker are doing that because they want a progressive candidate, or do you think that they want someone who is not...
pool is most likely to, frankly, I think that probably Biden, frankly. I think that pool, if your first choice is in that pool, unless maybe Beto and maybe Buttigieg are swimming in different waters that involve Sanders and Warren.
Well, look, there are plenty of people...
I think Harris and Booker are Biden.
There are plenty of people who just want a woman, and they're going to jump to her if Kamala is out of the race.
Whatever. It's all hypothetical. I think I'm just, look, Bernie is clearly the progressive front runner, and I think it's important. I just hope that if that dynamic holds, people coalesce. If there's a major earth-shattering globe reversal, I would say the thing's the other way. It's just that's not what it is right now.
Can I say one more thing about electability?
Sure.
Because, if there were strong evidence that one candidate was much, much, much more likely to beat Trump than the other candidates, I'd have to seriously take a look at that. But as of now, there's not. But if you want to look ahead to the future, to the electability in the future, I think there's an argument to be made that another crappy neoliberal centrist with politics from the Clinton era that have not changed would lead to an even more reactionary Republican winning 4 years from now. So that's what I would say to those people who are so concerned about Trump winning.
Right. That's the actual argument. I've been saying, what about 2022? What about 2024? This dynamic isn't going anywhere. And even if it is, God, it doesn't even need to be worse than Trump. It could just be another Republican-dominated,
look at what's happening in France. I know it's not totally analogous, but people hate Macron. And that makes a Le Pen victory that much more likely next time around.
Well, I think I'm partial to that argument. I think, but I think that's a second order argument that, you're not going to sway Alyssa Milano with that argument. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's a shame because she's clearly a very influential political mind.
It is a shame, but
Maybe I'll
the
send
reality.
her a DM.
I think basically what's going to have to happen, for those of us who don't want Joe Biden to be the nominee, is he's got to get on the campaign. Right now, they started out with a very clear agenda to make him seem like the Bigfoot in this. And the odd thing is, I think Bernie is perceived as the second most electable in the race. It is also, to some extent, it is a shame, just broadly speaking, that we can't be talking about two 50-year-old women, frankly, in the context of what I think this country really needs more. But we don't have two 50-year-old women who are, who have the politics and the stature at this point that I would like to see. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see if Biden can maintain that, and how. The real question is, if that's the calculus, how does Bernie make that argument, or any of the other candidates? How do they make the argument that they are more electable in 2020 than Joe Biden? And I think really what it's going to take is that they got to win the couple of the primaries. It's going to be organizing. And so if you are in any way distraught by this, money's going to be important, obviously, to support your candidate, but also getting out and organizing, because I think at the end of the day, that is going to be the big driver.
Yeah, and don't forget to register to vote in the primaries, by the way.
We're supposed to talk about that up front.
I just came across this yesterday. The deadline for New York to vote in the Democratic primary is crazy soon. Your registration has to be postmarked by May 31st, I believe. If you want to vote in the Democratic primary, you need to be a Democrat. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of states don't have open primaries. So definitely check on that for your state and make sure you get that in.
Yeah, get on that. We got to remember to talk about that at the beginning of the show tomorrow.
You can find that for your state on headcount.org.
Headcount.org.
/deadlines -dates.